is this a classic album? You know, and it's a very simple question, but I just wanted to discuss that and bring that to the group. Is this album a classic album? You know, so before we get to that, maybe we could talk about like first impressions of the album. What did you guys think? What is your personal experiences with the album? And overall, do you guys think that this is like would it be a classic? And this album was suggested by Haley, so maybe you could speak on it first, man.
Was it me? I feel like it was on my mind, but I want to make sure I didn't.
Or was it Paul? I'm sorry.
It was me. It's all
I'm
good.
sorry.
I was
Yeah.
like, damn, man, you gave Haley credit.
I'll take it. So, y'all, I know Halo through Paul, and I went to school with Paul, so we can clown him all we want for this.
Yeah. Yeah. So,
but I got thoughts, so I'll take second after you do.
Right. So Paul, maybe you could talk about it first, man.
Yeah. So I mean, I got into hiatus pretty early, very randomly. Probably 2012-ish. Actually, probably earlier than that. But yeah, it was just really random recommendation from a friend. And I really appreciated it. I think you heard on the album just how layered their sound is. It's a very dense listen, but it feels like typically I feel like when you do a lot, you're probably doing too much. But I think they do a really great job of like occupying space in a really thoughtful way where it feels like every element that they add to a song is really, really, really helpful in moving forward the compositions. Like if you've heard like Napalm, the lead singer of the group, if you've listened to some of her like solo work where she like does these solo renditions of a lot of the songs from the album and you hear how stripped down they are, you can kind of see the difference and it makes sense with a lot of the layering they do. To the point where you asked that question about, is it a classic? Maybe this is like a broader feeling I have about classics. I just don't think, I don't feel comfortable ever making a claim to an album being classic earlier than 15 to 20 years. And the reason for that is I think being a classic kind of requires longevity. Like there's a lot of shit that slaps right now and maybe will slap 5 years from now, but will it happen like 25 years from now? Will we still be playing it? And I think that's when you know it's a classic. Is it maybe a modern classic or like, you know, a staple of like this era? Yeah, I think so. But like the long term of it, I think that's kind of a bigger question that we may not be able to answer yet. But I'm hopeful. But I don't think so yet.
Word, okay. Haley, you said you got follow-up thoughts, like.
Yeah, appreciate that. So Hiatus is an interesting group to me because I don't think there are a lot of bands or production units, and full disclosure, I'm a part of one that I would try to put in this category. But why they speak to me is because they're cats who have like chops as musicians, but also understand how to work in the studio as producers. And I feel like oftentimes folks are just like really heavy on one end or another. You've got someone who, you know, the drums might slap, but they're not really imbuing a lot of music theory in the sound. Or you've got cats who can really play, but it's just like the production isn't quite hit. So the fact that they cover all that, I think, was kind of a feat to me. And like the references are deep. Like it's a deep record. Like there are moments where I'm getting like Return to Forever, like Chick Corea energy. Then like you got some 8-bit program like Super Mario, Japanese shit. Dilla is everywhere, but he's there too. So I think they're thoughtful about channeling those influences. I think it falls short of being a classic for me because I appreciate records that make sort of like a sonic statement, and it's a very the sound's all over the place, and I like that. But I think I prefer albums that foster cohesion. And I think if you were to play me different parts of that record, kind of like Pepsi Challenge or something, like is that the same group or is that the same album? So it's not really one thought, but it's a lot of brilliant ideas. And I think Napalm has found her voice. I mean, she emerged as a fully formed vocalist and lyricist. She's clearly informed by probably a decent amount of trauma. It's my sense. I feel a lot of pain in what she writes and how she sings. But is a very mature, I think, vocalist. So that matched with the musicianship of the cats makes it a dope album, but short of a classic because I think it's just a lot of ideas that don't quite cohere for me.
Interesting.
I wanted to revisit that 15 years makes a classic theory because that's what I'm gonna remember. So I don't know if anyone else wants to speak on that specifically or
if you wouldn't
or anything
mind,
that Haley said.
I'd love to speak on that a little bit. If that's cool. I fully appreciate the thinking and the framework around it, and the word classic gets thrown around.
It does.
Especially by the artist who makes the word. Instant classic, and it's like, hot single maybe, but there are some albums that I think in their moment establish themselves enough to be categorized as classics instantly. I think, and I look at them as like albums that become or that enter as turning points in music or in culture, or the capturing of a moment in time. I'd say like low-hanging fruit examples might be like Mary J's "My Life." That might be considered a classic, and at the moment it hit, we knew something was different. Most Def's "Black on Both Sides." I think the moment that hit, we all knew something was different.
Only Bill for Cuban Links.
Yeah, exactly. Like Raekwon, like these albums, the moment they hit, everything is different. First Wu-Tang, like I think there are, a huge amount of examples of things that just come in the door and change things. Michael Jackson's Thriller, like that did it. So I don't think it's a requirement for something to have 15 years worth of street credibility to be a classic. I think it just needs to mean something different and change the trajectory of things to establish themselves as that, whether it's instantly or over time.
And what's crazy is that with the 15 to 20 years, you have all these like super young people at like publications that are calling albums that we all know are not classics. Like, hey, it's the 20-year anniversary of the first Fugees album, and everybody's like, what the fuck? No. So it's weird because on the flip side, you have all these people that are rewriting history that weren't there when the albums came out.
Right.
They just like search for a year and they're like, this is the one, run with it.
Exactly. I mean, Zelda came out.
The whole thing is subjective. Like,
shout out to Ugg, man.
Yeah, trying to figure out what's a classic. The whole thing is subjective because I mean, like Stacking Chips 3 Times Crazy is a classic, but it really just depends on the amount of impact. And I mean, yeah, I don't know. It's hard when. And it changes with it, like you were saying, it changes with generations. It definitely changes with generations,
Would you say that impact is relative? And would you say that...
It's all relative. I think it's all relative.
Right, of course, right? Let's talk about art here. But, like, how much does, like, sort of when I think about classic, I think about replay value. Like, can we play it right now? Okay, cool. But, like, chances are, like, if you got this joint on repeat for a month straight, 2 months straight, you broke up with your girl or your partner, you went out, you had a good day, you had a bad day, and you had this album in your car, like, it's like replay value is kind of like why a lot of my friends that made music got very honest opinions from me, because it's just, I think replay value is at the root of this love. It all qualifies to be the best of the world.
Yeah, I mean, relatability through time. You know what I mean? I think the time aspect is really important. Like all the things that hit, but the time is an important thing when we're talking about classic.
Yeah.
I just want to add. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry, Helen. Go ahead.
Well, why don't you add what you're going to say? Then I want to.
I was going to say. I mean, not so much. It might be like a close second or something else entirely. It may not be a classic, but kind of what Jason was saying, that it defines a period in time. So when we look back and say, oh, let's take a look back, when some writer at Pitchfork or The Fader wants to do like a recap of post R&B or new jazz, they're going to mention this album without a doubt. They'll mention Hiatus, they'll mention Thundercat, Kamal Williams, or just anything alternative R&B post jazz. So I think though that album may not be their classic, you can't play it at a party, but that group and that album is like, yo, that's what we're talking about. So, yeah.
So
I think that's a good, or I'm sorry, who's?
I was just
Oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna add that the reason that I think that time is so significant is maybe the term classic can be more broadly used in that case when we're talking about impact. But the reason I use time is because something like the College Dropout, for example, I feel like was a turning point. I mean, I don't know who's listened to the College Dropout lately. Like I love early Kanye, but it hasn't aged extremely well in my opinion, and I don't think it is going to age even more down the road. But it was absolutely a turning point. And so, does that make it a classic because it was a turning point versus the things that came after it that actually implemented or added more onto it and kind of added value? I don't know. I just think that impact is important, but I don't know if it's enough if the music doesn't stand the test of time.
I think that's an excellent point, but I think
So
that
together.
also plays into that idea of relative too, because there are people out there that would say they spend that daily, and there's a quantity of people who might say that too. So yeah, I mean, all of these factors play into the establishment of something being a classic, and perhaps all of these ingredients are required for that. I don't think any isolated one defines it, but I like the idea of these intersections defining whether something is classic or not.
Definitely. We're gonna say Wiz.
I just want to drop one thing before we move on to your point. I just want to say, and this is for the future discussion, since we're going to talk about this topic of classic, I want to offer that other than an album being able to be considered a classic after a certain amount of years, I also want to offer a theory that I have, which is that within a close amount of years to an album being released, it is almost impossible to get a consensus on it being classic, right? Because there is a period of time in which I feel like the zeitgeist has gotten over a certain sound and has moved into another sound, and people's temperament for whatever that sound was, as excited that they were, has moved on to the next thing. And so I think that happens a lot too. There, for instance, songs that might have come out in '87 rap songs that may have come out in '87 may not actually hit the way that the songs that came out in '92 were hitting at that time. And so people are kind of like, oh, that was all right. But then, you get 10 years out and people get nostalgic for that sound. All right.
Yeah. Well, I want to turn it back to the Hiatus Coyote album specifically. Keeping that in mind, because I do want to go down the line and answer that question definitively after the discussion. Another question I wanted to pose to the group is about Napalm. So this was actually my first Hiatus Coyote album that I've listened to. And I'm familiar with Napalm. I'm familiar with the group. She's a superb singer, and she's a true vocalist. And I wanted to ask, because was this the first Hiatus Coyote album that came out? Or was there one? This is the second. Okay. Yeah. So my question is Napalm, is she one of the top 3 singers that has come out since 2012?
Yikes.
Very arbitrary year you picked.
When is she? Isn't that when the first album came out? 2012.
That's a
huge question. What about?
Is she one of the top 3?
Wait. Hey, can we clarify what you mean by that? Do you mean
no?
It's come out since then?
I mean the release of the album, the release of the first album.
Paul has a good point. Paul is asking.
I was gonna ask, do you mean like of artists that have come out since 2012?
Right.
Okay, that
like
makes
all
a little
the artists.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, the vocalists.
All of them?
Like all of them.
All of them.
Like all the genres. And
who else is in the category? Who else will be up for consideration?
I need a list.
Hold on, time out.
Yeah, we need a list.
It's a great question to ask because her voice is hella distinctive and he's keeping it pretty much within the decade.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So I'm saying, like, has there
Does a
been?
distinctive voice equate to best singer?
I think that's up to you to decide, though. Like,
It is up to you to decide because we call it like an artist, because the best singer might be about the quality of voice, the vocal range, and all of that. But in terms of like a singular artist, that could also encompass their writing ability, their presence, their ability to perform, all
Yeah.
of these things. Like, are we talking about that or singing?
I think I'm thinking of singers specifically. I'm not talking about. I'm thinking of like her as a vocalist, like because to me I think she is like she stands out as a vocalist. In my opinion, I think that's a
I think there's a
general
bit of a
agreement.
nuance here, right? And I hear where you're going with it, but particularly when you talk about Naipam and the tone of voice that she uses, I want to compare it to like Rosalia, right? And Rosalia is nuanced because she sings in Spanish and her original roots are in flamenco, right? There's this whole beef about how Latin she is and all that, which I think is fucking humbug. But like, it's so her roots are in flamenco music, right? And she has this tonality. But what happens is, for me, let's say I am Latino, I speak Spanish, but I'm Colombian. Her dialect in Spanish makes her like top tier because her pen and the way that they speak Spanish and the way that they personify feelings and emotions is like crazy. Now, when you think about Naipam, I feel like their lyrics also have that like cultural nuance. Their use of the English language is particular. So I think it's for me, it creates this sort of resistance to try to deem the best.
Yeah.
There's something about her singularity as a songwriter to me. Like, no one writes songs like Napalm. And to me, it means you put your hours in and mastered your craft if you're writing something unlike anyone else could write. So I give her that.
Right.
I think that's separate from her chops as a vocalist, but her pen game is strong.
Okay.
I'll say this for Napalm. You know, having seen her, I've actually never seen Hiatus Coyote. I've only ever seen her solo, which is interesting. But I've only ever listened to their albums, right? So her phraseology is probably the illest of any person since their first release on any continent that I've listened to. I get notes of like Zap Mama. She plays in a lot of different areas in terms of where her range goes. And it's really like a interesting conversation she's having where she lays ad libs and backup vocals. It's really not just like, you know, like as an MC, you know, stacking and you know, brightening certain areas and going for impact in certain areas. That's really not what she's doing at all. She's really playing her ad libs like it's another instrument in terms of the tone she hits there. So, you know, I can't say that, you know, she's the best, but she's doing something that no one else is doing. So if I give her the MC props, then I say, yeah, she's smashing everyone, you know, because no one's doing what she's doing, you know?
I like that. And under that framework, I would definitely put her up there, and I would add in people like Serpent with Feet. I think is like one of the most interesting vocalists, just musically overall. He's just really phenomenal. If you haven't heard of Serpent with Feet, it's just this opera / secular gospel thing that he does, and his voice is just it's just odd, right? And Nick Hakim, who I mentioned before that I've been listening to, like those are the people that I think are doing very odd vocal things. And so it's hard to say, are their vocals the best, or are they just doing the most unique things with their voices?
Yeah, I would throw like Moses Sumney,
yes,
you know, James Blake in the mix on that too. Just like people worth talking about that are. But for me, I struggle with the idea of, you know, categorizing them as the best singers, because there's so much more about them that is defining their sound that they are in control of. That, you know, that's why I was trying to ask the question, the distinction between singer and artist, because these people, I feel like, control everything around what they make. You know, whether they are, you know, the lyricists behind the music, whether they are the producers behind the music, whether they're the brainchild behind the vision of who they are. There's so much more around them, and to throw them in a competition about who's the best singer, I think diminishes what makes them great.
Right. Well, definitely. I mean, I think that.
Can I say something very simple? Just very simple. Sorry,
For sure.
All right, check this out. Everybody eat different types of food, right?
Yeah.
And you may be a vegan, you may be a pescatarian, maybe a raw vegan. I don't know. You may eat soul food. For whatever lane that you in, you're gonna feel a certain way, and for me, I think the chick sings just okay. I'm just gonna be honest with you. But that's just my opinion because I listen to different types of people that sing it. But for everyone else, if you part of a certain lane, you like, oh, yo, she dope. To me, she sounds basic. She doesn't even sound that better than Coco. Just me though. That's because I'm on a different lane. I take the one-on-one.
Banging, like,
I cannot ride with you on that.
Dope. You know what I'm saying? I can't knock it. I'm just keeping it real.
I was like Coco from Quadrant, bro. Coco from Quadrant.
Man, which Coco you were talking about?
I said
from SWV.
I don't think she sings better than Coco.
Oh, okay.
No, I'm playing.
But
I was gonna bring
there's a point there though. There's a point there though.
I listen to Teacher Moses. You know what I'm saying? So it's like I can't. That's
the thing though. Because if you were trying to compare her to say like Layla Hathaway, like no, she's not a better vocalist than Layla Hathaway. Like that's
No.
If we're talking about like technical
That's
things,
my
like
point.
probably not.
Right.
But to other people,
That's why
she's
it's
probably
2012.
Yeah.
Exactly. So,
But, and to speak of Layla Hathaway, like who in this chat, the likelihood of us checking out her album is very small. But us checking out anything Napalm or Hiatus is very strong. So
No, but that's what I'm saying. Different. It
depends on who
is.
you are.
yeah.
It really depends on who you are.
I can
It
show,
really
I can
depends.
show my ass right now. I could be like
My
Patrick.
point.
Hey, depends on the day.
To Layla Hathaway.
I knew I was gonna say. Yeah.
Well, and I think well, first of all, I just wanted to say I apologize for the softball question. I forgot who I was dealing with. I'm dealing with.
No, it's good.
No. I'm
was
completely.
going to say I was mad at
I'm-
that question too.
No, I'm completely
Rainbow
joking.
Coalition.
I know. No, but I think that where I was going with the question was that I think with Napalm, I hear in her voice, and to me, I'm not big on vocals in general. Like I'm just not a big vocal person. And I know it's a broad statement, but that's just the way I am. But I feel like there's definitely nuance in her voice, and I feel like Rubik's, you kind of spoke to the phraseology, which I thought was a really great word. But I just feel like that people acknowledge that there's something unique about her and that she does something different. Best or greatest is an arbitrary word, like you were saying, Jason. Right. So, I wanted to pose that to the group and see how y'all felt.
Got us fired up with that one.
Apparently, I know how to press buttons now. I was gonna bring a soundboard too with some sound effects, so that might be for next one. But yeah, so I think so for this album. I mean, does anybody have any other thoughts about this album specifically before we all collectively decide if it's a classic or not?
Yeah, I mean, with this album, I came into it, I'd heard of Hiatus Coyote before. I'd listened to their first, and this one kept sneaking into playlists that I would hear, and I would always just like, damn, man, that's hot. It's still hot. Mm-hmm. And it took me a minute to take the time to sit with it front to back. And when I finally did, I was really appreciative. I was really glad that I did, and I was really glad to hear that the follow-up was as rich as it was. But oddly, I just wasn't compelled to immediately dive into it when I heard it. I'm embarrassed to say it took me a really long time to, but I think it is a really important album, and I think it has complexities to it and depth to it that it allows you to come back over and over again. It allows you to isolate each individual song and immerse yourself in it. And collectively, it works really well. I will say, to be very honest with it, I listen to it in pieces.
Okay.
Like listening to it front to back over and over again, I can't do. You know, it doesn't take away from their musicianship. It doesn't take away from their gifts at all. But this particular album, I think, I just be, you know, harsh with it. Like for me, it just it doesn't feel like it takes me on a journey from front to back, where I need to listen to every moment. I feel like I get into patterns with this album that I'm like, okay, yep, that's their thing. Like they're doing their thing again and keep on doing it. But it doesn't make me need to listen front to back. And so I struggle with calling this a classic. Like there are epic moments in it, and it's an important album. But it's missing something to get me front to back.
I think this album really like leaves like a legacy behind, because Anderson .Paak sampled it for his album, which was like his like it's not his debut, but that was the album that like really caught fire for him. You know what I mean? And I think that's an important part of its of Choose Your Weapons legacy in a way, that it bears fruit. You know what I mean? You can break off a branch and create a foundation on your own, you know what I mean? But I think we would be remiss if we didn't mention Homegirl from Little Dragon in that combo we were having.
Oh yeah, for sure.
You know, she's got her thing going. She's very she's very similar to Napalm, I think. She's got her own writing style, she's got her own singing style. She almost sounds like an instrument.
You know what? That was one of the things, because today was the first time I even heard this album. And with the first hiatus album, I'm a big Little Dragon fan. And when I heard the first one, I was just like, oh, another funky voice singer girl from a different country. And like it kind of, and also, I don't know, it's kind of like turned me off for the group. So I just wasn't like checking for hiatus Cody like after the first one. I like that Nakamura song, but then I just wasn't checking it. I'm just being honest. And so that's why I was kind of honing in on the unique voice, best singer thing. So I was just like, yeah, but so like there's a lot of people with unique voice, you know, and it doesn't determine if they're the greatest. Like Anthony from Hercules and Love Affair, you know, it's like you've got a crazy voice, but it's scary. I wouldn't say he's like, you know, one of the greatest of. Wiz, you're raising your hand.
Yeah, I was going to say that the thing that hiatus Coyote doesn't really have going for them is that they are not necessarily. Y'all can correct me if I'm wrong, but they didn't necessarily emerge from a scene. Contemporaries. They are part of what we consider genre, sub-genre, or like adjacent to musical movement.
Is that because they're not American?
It's not because they're not American, because we can all name several artists that we really like that emerged from scenes that were in other countries, particularly the UK.
But
the UK has many scenes. Jason, what are you gonna say?
They're from where? Australia or UK?
Australia.
This is my
Australia. Point. Australia is a different place.
This is my point.
When I went to Australia and I was like, oh, y'all like soul music. Like there's a thing down there that they really do like soul, like that particular sound, and so I feel like while, being a scene or being in a locale that's listens to a genre that's very specific to American Black music lineage, you're never going to pick up, or not never, but because the UK has done it, right? But picking up, like, this is the locale for it. But Australia they look to the UK first to see what's popping, and then America, at least from my purview. Like, and it seems like that in of itself makes it like, oh, we like this music and we make this music. But there's not like other artists, like huge outward facing artists that they come out of, like a scene they come out of.
This was what I wanted to say too, and then also they have. There's so much going on in one Hiatus Coyote song, as somebody else pointed out. There's so much going on that I think that for sometimes those of us who want like what I would call straight ahead soul, you know, we're not gonna place them in the same category because I feel like sometimes they're trying to like flex their virtuistic chops. You know what I mean?
More jazz fusion than soul.
Yeah.
Exactly. I think
It's like a live show.
Yeah. Aileen pointed that out with all the things that you get, the elements you get in one song. And I think that contributes to it where it's like, man, you know, if I'm slapping something, like I said, like a Quadrin, like a Moses Sumney someone brought up, like what's my girls, Paris and them?
King.
It's just I'm just getting a real kind of what I call a pop structured song that is played within that genre. Whereas Hiatus Coyote is like, we are like the band.
Yeah, I mean, it's jazz.
The kids that got to make a full album, and I'm just gonna go wild in one song. You know what I'm saying? And I'm gonna their references seem to be living very heavily. Their jazz references seem to be living very heavily in their music. And I think that and I only say this to say, I like the question because as a vocalist, it's good to ask, particularly within the time frame, but it's the music around it and the bedrock that she has that pulls us from comparing her to certain artists because we're not slapping them in comparison. Like, think about it. Okay, a Hiatus Coyote song where I'm like at, you know, whatever Earth Rat incense party, you know, feel me? Like, and what ends up happening is they're playing all the other jams that you feel like you're gonna hear, and oh shit, you know, oh shit, they played the Tribe song and we're getting all juice and that's my jam, and then the newest, whoever is fucking hella tight for 3 months or whatever, you know what I'm saying, and then they playing a throwback J Davy, and it's like, oh, Sly Rob, all dancing to that one Sly Rob joint. But then I feel like to even play Hiatus Coyote, you got to play like the Breathing Underwater Spinner remix to even pull them into the mix. You know what I'm saying? So we kind of put them over there. That's I just want to point that out.
Jay, why you pose like a vampire?
Oh yeah, you know.
So
wait, what'd you say?
So I think we should move on to the next album. So I think we should do a show of hands. Like, who thinks this is a classic album? Let's raise your hand if you think it's a classic album.
Or drop it in the chat too. Just be like,
drop it in the chat. If you think it's a classic, drop a 1. If you think it's not a classic, drop a 0.
There we go.
Big old fat goose ass.
This is an absolute value situation. Yes or no?
Right.
Right. 2, not a classic. Drop a deuce. Drop a 2.
So classic 1, not a classic 2.
Can I throw something out there that doesn't require discussion, but like, and then we can move on quickly.
Sure.
One thing that I have heard from other people with regard to Hiatus Coyote is, and you know, this is strictly from my black people, is that you know, Wiz talked about, you know, coming from a scene or something. You know, I think to Jason's point as well, like a lot of people have considered them in that culture vulture zone where, you know, they've taken from, you know, black culture and done their thing to it, and you know, musically they're extraordinary, but you know, are they really representing the references well? And it's not an opinion I hold. I respect them for who they are, but it is amazing how many times I've been around that conversation with regard to Hiatus Coyote.
Right? Yeah. I mean, also that conversation, is it held by music folks though? Because that's the other issue, is that a lot of people, I've been saying for years, a lot of people listen to music with everything else but their ears too, and some people are just a cut above, no matter where they come from, you know, what they look like, and so that it's a thing where can you truly be objective? And I mean, not to say that some folks are not, but it's a question to ask, you know.
Right. Yeah, no, it's a good conversation, definitely.
Have y'all heard her? Have y'all heard her cover Curtis Mayfield? She's like in the hospital. She covers the making of. She covers the makings of you in the hospital.
Mm.
I didn't bring that up for any reason. That's the first thing I thought about. Was like, yeah, shit. You know, is it appreciation? Is it Jack in there? Or some people just mad?
Yeah.
Or like, is it ever going to be as soulful as Curtis Mayfield? Because nobody really had that kind of crack nowadays.
Just drop that in the chat if you have it.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes it's like champagne can only come from Champagne, France. You know what I'm saying? But it's,
Right, exactly. Everything else is Prosecco.
right. So it is, you know.
So I wanted to move on to so based on what we're saying, it's not a classic. So I know it's binary, yes or no, but that's kind of the game that we're playing here. So Dom Kennedy, I'm really excited to talk about this for a couple of reasons, because I really want to hear what people who are not in LA and not on the West Coast think about Dom. I think he's super polarizing, where some people love him, some people not so much. So I'm really excited to hear people talk about Dom. Some of the questions I wanted to answer for this one is this a great album? And I think, is this Dom Kennedy's best album? And also, the main question is, overall, how is Dom rated as an MC? Like, is he overrated? Is he underrated? Or is he rated just about right?
Can I set it off too? Because I picked this album.
Yeah, sure. And Wiz picked this album, so maybe he could speak a little bit about it.
All right, y'all. So I picked this album. Really, to be honest, I wanted to get this thing kicked off, and I wanted to get it kicked off with something that was also contemporary rap music. I love rap music. I'm a rap music practitioner. For real, I know, like straight up, like I didn't grow up playing instruments and shit. Oakland Public Schools wasn't like, you know what I'm saying, on the shit that a lot of people was on. So I'm proud to be taking inanimate objects and making slap out of that shit. You know what I'm saying? And so when it comes to Dom Kennedy, for me, one of the things when we were putting this thing together, we wanted to make sure it was albums that people could access. So initially, my choice was an album by a group called the Piff Gang, which is a British rap group, but they took it off of SoundCloud, so I couldn't, you know what I'm saying, I couldn't suggest that album. So I was like, I'm gonna suggest this album. And the reason why is, you know, last decade, Los Angeles had a really great run of making rap music. But as a city, it's pretty marginalized when it comes to the native people of Los Angeles are hella marginalized when it comes to their music getting shine, unbeknownst to most people, because everyone always thinks of Snoop and all the biggest artists, but the newer artists were. And Dom Kennedy was like the shining force in that scene, and particularly because when you look at all the artists that were starting to come out that were rappers from this streetwear blogosphere scene, so the Dom Kennedys, the Pac Divs, the Toronto A. Omaris, he seemed to have the highest ceiling, right? But most of those artists never necessarily made completely good on what are projections of where they could go. This also may include Dom to some, you know, I want to see what you guys are going to say, like Haleen mentioned, right? But this particular album, he had gotten into this specific space where it was like, okay, now people are going to fucking listen to what I'm saying. I'm not calling my albums mixtapes anymore, my mixtapes, or my albums that I'm making mixtapes anymore, because even like Future Street Drug Sounds, it's an album, but he was still calling it a mixtape. Then he got to the West Side of Love 1, and it still felt like it was like he was sort of calling it a mixtape. It wasn't on platforms. You know what I'm saying? And thank you, Kenya. I don't want to forget you and I. I mean, please, definitely.
It's so many.
Throw in some groups. It's a lot of people. So
I mean, Pac Div and all of them was at the time.
Pac Div, Dom, you and I. What's the Overdose? Right? Overdose is in there. What's his name from Houston? There was a cat from Houston in there. Blue and Exile, Carter.
Donis, hella people, yeah.
You know, and then early
Donis.
Yeah, Donis. Oh my God.
Donis.
Y'all gonna love.
Let's talk about Los Angeles. Let's not talk about Atlanta. All right.
Oh,
With the
man.
blog era. I'm sorry, my bad. Yeah.
Early PD, absolutely. Early
Yeah, Blue.
PD, KC Veggies. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And then we could just go to, then there was a whole movement of the curly tops and Nautica jackets. So the
Yeah, polyester thing. Yeah.
the same,
LA.
Sand and all of them. 310, who is now a major director. You know what I'm saying? And so this particular album was the album where it was like, oh shit, like it encompassed all of it. Seemed like everything he had been working on had led up to this moment before he was able to kind of push himself over. And then the next album you saw he had, a Rick Ross feature, you know what I'm saying? And then a Kendrick feature. You know what I mean? When Kendrick had already blown up. So this is why I picked this album in particular. And I think Haleen kind of went through the questions. So I want to just open it up to you guys. Like even looking at the questions, like maybe the question that we could start with from this is, where does this album rank for you among like the 2010 albums of those artists who I named that came out of Los Angeles?
And I'll post the questions in the chat too. So
I'll go first. I know. Okay, so just trying to remember what Haleen was saying. I'm surprised. Like when the Yellow album with the one that you just mentioned with the Kendrick and Rick Ross, that to me was my shit. Like I played that album so much, like nonstop, and it's not on Spotify, which is very odd. I don't. Someone's not counting the money right or something. I can't get an artist his breakout album, if you want to say it, not being on Spotify. So there's that. It's not his best album. I would show to people. Don Kennedy, I've been talking. So funny you mentioned that. I've just been talking to homies about him and Larry June. They're like my favorite best worst rappers because they're terrible. They're not good technically, but that just proves to me like that's how crazy rap can be. You can not be technical, but just say hella cool shit, ride the pocket, have good production. And that's it. It doesn't have to be complicated. It doesn't have to be, French laundry. It can be, food you made on the stove.
But I would say, right, being in the pocket, having the voice, saying the fly shit is an essential skill.
What, Mike?
You don't have to be a lyrical miracle.
Nah, and I wouldn't want that. Like, who listens to lyrics? I mean, I like lyrics, but I'm not listening to like a moral technique. No offense to anybody, but some shit like that.
Hey.
Yeah. But,
come on, man.
Yeah.
Yo, Immortal ain't the bar for lyrical no more, man.
Yeah. I think it's really hard to get to pinpoint a rapper who is making technically good rap songs that we want to hear outside of our headphones, and they are lyrical. It's very few and far between, right?
It would be like Schoolboy or Kendrick and something like
Kendrick
that.
is a perfect example. Yeah. It's debate. I'm sure this will be a point of contention. But Cole, you know what I'm saying? But I'm just gonna say this: that I always say this to rappers who are, and it's always mostly rappers who I'm talking to when I have to say this. But it is more difficult to make the kind of music Larry June and Dom Kennedy makes, to make the kind of music that a lot of Bay Area rap artists make, than it is to make the lyrical miracle. You know what I'm saying? I only rap about rap music as songs. Those songs are very easy to make. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. But when it comes to making a song that some kid down the street who lives down the street from you to garner their attention, yeah, like, I mean, you know what I'm saying? A lot of rappers who we love, they can't do that. They aren't always able to do that. You know what I'm saying? I still love their music, and I don't keep them on the hook for having to do that. But man, Dom Kennedy, he makes what I call like lifestyle rap. You know what I'm saying? Like when you hear his music, you know what it's like to be from the part of Los Angeles where he's from. He raps about the places where he's from. Like when I first got here, I was like, yeah, I'm about to go get me some Players Punch. I'm about to go to Earl's Grill, you know what I'm saying? And pull up, and he really is able to communicate his lifestyle in a really dope ass way. And I kind of felt that, like there's a term that my homies know I have, it's part of the expression, but it's called nigga wave. He makes nigga wave, you know what I'm saying? Like there is some rap music where you can, it's always funny because we have these debates about appropriation and all this other shit when it comes to like rap music. And then particularly backpack rap, or whatever. But I always say, like, there's some rappers where their music is inextricably linked to being black. You know what I'm saying? There is no debate. The shit how they rapping and shit can't be appropriated. Don't you know what I'm saying? Like, and he's one of those people. But then there's some people who be like, well, I don't want to appropriate that. Maybe I do want to rap about spiritual.
Scientific.
So I want to hear from someone. I want to hear from someone who doesn't live in LA or hasn't spent a lot of time in LA to speak on Dom, because that's kind of a perspective I'd like to hear. Or
I'd like to say something about it.
Please do.
Before this mentioning of it here, like, this is the first time I ever really listened to it. I'd heard his name before, but I had never heard anything from him. So this is my first time listening to this MC.
Okay.
And, you know, I hear a lot of Kanye and Consequence, and, you know, I don't get a lot of the references, but it definitely feels like, oh, this seems like it was a moment for this guy to, like, discover a voice, maybe. I don't know. But I also just felt like every song is the exact same song.
Right.
Like, no song changes. And then the content of it is just sort of like, you know, I fuck with Slick Rick, you know? I mean, but, you know, he he made some foul ass songs. I just really couldn't. I couldn't, like, yo, you know what? Yeah, I'm gonna skip that one. And a lot of this stuff just kind of falls into that pocket for me. Though he's in the pace where it's like it's really chill, it's really mellow. It's like, oh, it's Cali, yo, we high, yo, we good. And that's cool, but for me, it was like, yo, I think I can't rock this outside of me just trying to figure out what this person's about. And I just heard, like, Consequence does this, but better. A bit more lyrical miracle. That's what I got from it.
That face you just made, Wiz, I gotta hear.
Amazing. I mean, I love Consequence.
I have no
love Consequence.
Consequence. I love Consequence. It's not the same. They stunting. It's rap shit.
Well,
he's doing the rap shit, but it's a different.
I'm gonna say this too. I like that kind of rap from New York too.
Right.
So I like the A$AP Rockies and the, you know what I'm saying? I enjoy the same kinds, because I love all kinds of rap. I mean, if you want to talk about Binary Star, I can do that. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I can get deep on you if you want to. You know, if you want to talk about, I don't know, Asheru and Blue Black, I'm telling you, I know all the shit. But
that's family. I get it.
Yeah.
I'm just saying, my listen to it was just sort of like, okay, here's the thing I'll say. I think I missed the time, you know?
I think that's a good point.
That's important.
Yes,
that's important.
My first time listening to this, if I'd been somewhat familiar with the guy, like, maybe, but content-wise, I feel like I'm not getting, like, the content that he's putting out, like so many other people have done it to me, and in a more,
in a way that's more relatable, in a way that's more relatable to you.
Yeah, it was more exciting for me. And I'm not saying this is a knock to Cali at all, because Blue and Exile is my shit.
Yeah.
Like, I fucks with that. I knew who they were. I knew who he was. Like, I was tracking that. I'm on that. Right. The Sarah, that whole, you know, I mean, you know, the whole, like, hundreds and, you know, everything that was happening over in that area, Diamond and all that stuff. But I just wasn't familiar with this guy, and this just hit me as, like, a hard try, because I hear so many other things.
Right.
Context is so important.
What's up, Dash? I actually agree with you when you talk about needing to be there for the time, just because as much as I love this album, it is, like I said before, it's a representative of a moment. Now, B had his hand up, and then also Jason had his hand up. So B, I want to make sure you get a chance to speak.
Sorry, I'm on an iPhone. I can't see everyone.
No, it's all good. It's all good.
I just want to. I didn't get a chance to say this earlier when I spoke because I got all excited that we were nerding out on music. I just want to say that I know most of you and that some of you I have met in passing. I just want to say it's really good to see everybody, man, and be here and talk music and have a distraction. I've had a pretty tough couple days with climate of what's going on in our country. I live in Los Angeles here, and this, it's tough to be in this kind of like situation and to be digesting media like we do because we're all children of the media. We love this shit, and I just want to thank Wiz and Halo for organizing, and Lex from Fire, and everybody that's here, man. I really respect y'all. Honestly, if it wasn't Halo and Wiz invited me to an album discussion club, I'd have been somewhere smoking weed. But
both.
My perspective. The weed's on the way. I'm gonna smoke anyway. But I want to share my perspective as an East Coast kid. Even though I've been coming to Los Angeles since like around 2010, I felt like all of those dudes, like Pac Div, Dom Kennedy, the Cool Kids, I felt like those cats were so dope. Like they dressed dope. I thought their beat selection was dope. I thought their cover art was dope. And I think if we're talking about an album discussion club, one of the first things that I want to talk about is the art. Like I always like album art is a thing that I just love, and I'm just always nerding out on it because sometimes I think that like this album could be so much iller if it had better art, if it had a better album. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. Like it's just things like that, like the way it sits on the shelf. I'm kind of mad at it. Like the way Nas wore his hat and Stillmatic. I wish he would have just had it up. You know what I'm saying? Just like little funny. But like, yeah, this shit was like, it was a little curved too, and he had like the ill, like
big facts, bro.
Like, that's how we picking our sports teams too. You like the Bills helmet or like what?
Yeah, we can talk about that.
And they had a Photoshop pigeon too.
That shit was wild out of size, man. It was not out of scale. That joint was bigger than his whole like leg now.
Hilarious.
So like that's how sort of that was my point of contact for this West Coast stuff, is that I would come here, and it's the same thing with and I love talking to you about this because it was the same thing with me when it comes to Bay Area rap. And I believe that's because that's just not how cats spoke the way I grew up. So when you were talking that pimp shit like this, I was like, "Oh, that's dope!" But it was more of like a novelty. You know what I'm saying? When it was like, this sounds like an exaggerated character from a place that I've never been, which was totally real. Because the first time I DJ'd in the Bay, I played at Beauty Bar in the Mission. And I like smashed that shit, yo. But then my boys went on after and dropped the Too Short shit. Everybody knew every word of the song. And I was so jealous that I was so tapped out of this culture where I had friends from there and I had people who were such, Bay Area fans and advocates, but I just wasn't into it. And it's the same thing. That's the barrier I got to when I hit Dom Kennedy back in 2011, back in 2012. Like, I was like, oh, shit, Bobby Hundreds posted about this. He got the new Hundreds. On. Let me rock this. This is tight. Bobby Hundreds shot this on a full-frame camera. He blogged about it. This is authentic LA. I love LA. And then I would go and, like, listen to it, and it just, it wasn't, like, it just didn't punch me like that. And therefore, it still becomes that. And as I listened to it, because I did my homework on this joint, I got fucking producer notes and all of this shit on it. It still doesn't do anything for me. You know what I'm saying? And I think also, the subject matter, I think it goes back to the time. Like, it doesn't hit. Now I'm looking at it again, and that whole, like, Take Your B, that whole situation, like, it's just, for me, it's kind of, it's tired. And it was tired then because Kendrick dropped, and all that dropped, and I was like, yo, he's a Tupac of the West. Oh my God. And like, you know what I'm saying? So I think just as a West Coast, as an East Coast cat that appreciated the West Coast and wanted to know more, it's not a great album to me. Dom doesn't rank as an MC for me. The album amongst the 2010 LA rap albums, I think, is in the upper echelon of a defining sound. Is this his best albums? Absolutely. And how he should be rated. I don't know if he's culturally, before we even get to rate it, I don't even know if he's really acknowledged, because it seems to be like this narrow nuance of people. I mean, this narrow niche group of people that are like, all of a sudden we start talking about that era and everybody starts naming them off, but you go and like bump that at a party, or you know, you just play that for someone,
Man.
you know what I'm saying? And just like, yo, have you heard this? And it's like this like dope pack div track, you know, which I thought that they were dope. And the same, you know, I bring up the Cool Kids because they were dope. But it just it doesn't, I don't think that I don't think that era, I don't think we've lived long enough for that era to be acknowledged as the turning point, as the pivotal point, the blog era, the you know, changing of the guard when it came to like, I'm gonna just drop this, those songs getting leaked on a whole new scale. I mean, that was a whole other like era for songs getting leaked.
Early hype beast.
Dom was the dude.
Dom was, he had the kicks, he had all the
He
collaboration.
stepped out in front of everybody because I remember there was this freestyle video over NERD. He did what was the nerd freestyle? Everyone was like,
the
"Who
bathroom.
is this dude?"
Everybody,
yeah.
And once that, he just did it. He did what I think a lot of people were trying to do. So while I feel like this album, there's a lot of stuff I skip, but I love a lot of the songs on here. But I feel like that's me with every album. Like, it's hard pressed for me to get playthroughs on a lot of things. And so while we may be judging the album specifically, and like some of his best work is not even streaming, like the impact is there, and the songs are there. It might just not all be on this one project. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I'd like to point out real quick because I know that Jason Nichols wanted to say something. I just want to say something real quick about this. One of the also kind of batteries in my back why I picked this album. I think you guys are making excellent points about one needing to be there for the moment, and I love your point about how you understood the distinction between what was going on in other parts of the country and what you were privy to, right? Because B, you're originally from where?
My hometown is Providence, Rhode Island.
Right, okay. And so my point is this, is that the reason why I always represent this type of rap music within the canon of rap is, one, yes, because I'm from the Bay, so that was an excellent point you made, B. And two, what is locally accepted in New York is recognized as the culture for rap music. So imagine if white people from West Virginia, all of their way that they do shit was representative of all whiteness everywhere. That's how rap music works, right? So if you go, because New York was first. And to me, that is the flyest shit ever. To New York will always be able to say, hey, bro, we made this shit. Like Cedric and Cedar, like, you know what I'm saying? Because that's how I am from Oakland. Oakland, we seem obnoxious the way we represent our shit in terms of the Bay Area. So the coolest shit to me in the world is to be able to also be able to say, I'm from New York and we made hip hop, right? But what it also makes me do is realize that there are other sensibilities that are marginalized within the genre, within the culture. And so I always have to rep for those sensibilities because culture is not finite. You know what I'm saying? And as an African-American, you know, a regular smuggler black person, you know what I'm saying, with no ties to Caribbean or whatever, you know what I'm saying? Know that my family's from Africa, definitely. I like to be able to say, this is how the fuck we rock. You know what I'm saying? And I love it. And I love our contributions to culture now and moving forward. And it's the same thing from the Bay, Houston, slowed down. I mean, shit, Houston, we don't even get started on how influential they've been to all of rap. You know what I'm saying? The most influential DJ of the last damn near 10 years has been DJ Screw. Every genre would slow their music down. You know what I'm saying? And you don't even want to talk about his influence on Toronto, which, you know what I'm saying? No matter how you feel about Drake, that's the influence. You know what I mean? So that's the reason why I picked an album like this in particular.
But I don't think that just because the voice is marginalized means that it's also like good just because it's from like an audience that doesn't get love. And I think it's like when I think about LA, because when I think about LA from this era, and like for context, like I'm born and raised East Coast, Midwest, but heavy family in LA, so I've been going back and forth my entire life. So I love LA. I love Dom Kennedy. I'm a big Dom fan, but personally, I just don't think it's a great album. Like I think it's just like it's just kind of like it only hits when I'm in LA, which I think is a red flag to me. And I would take for the West Side of Love the first album. I would take the true. I would take from the West Side of Love.
New Jeeps only hits in LA.
Mostly, and here's why I'm saying that. First off, just take a step back. I would take For the West Side with Love, the first one, the mixtape. I think it's better than the album.
Yeah.
And part of that is LAUSD as a production group is incredible. And they just didn't have as much on. I think Polyester had maybe one joint on the album, but like had like 8 or 9 on like the mixtape. I just thought it was produced much better. The other part is like when you think about that era, like I would take Pac Div, Mania, Saran, Ketchup. Like there's so many other mixtapes that I would send to people that didn't know LA, and they would translate. But Dom was the one where it's just like, nah, this just and I get like, and I'm saying this again as a fan of Dom. Something says to me that people, not New York people, but people in Boston, people in Chicago, people in Texas, it just didn't quite land that hard. I think it's a measure that it should probably translate to everybody. It doesn't mean it's bad, but
right.
What you're saying, Paul, I think you're right about, particularly about this album. This is the album I had to pick because it was on platforms, and Haleen and I talked about this, right? Like, if we didn't have to make sure that there was, this because it's our first meeting, if we didn't have to make sure there was an ease of access, right? I probably would have picked From the West Side with Love 1, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
Right? Like,
that slaps.
Absolutely. But I did want to pick this album because in the pantheon of all of those albums, whether it's in Mania, whatever, this is a high point, but it's not the highest point. The highest point, I would argue, to come out of that era is Victory Lap. But this was a point before that said someone from that scene was going to actually emerge out of the scene on a different level than everyone else. But I think you're absolutely right. And your point about the voice being marginalized doesn't mean it's good. I 100% agree with that because truthfully, Kendrick Lamar actually did what we are saying in terms of representing for that marginalized voice in the best possible way.
Yeah.
All right, Jason Nichols. Your mic is off.
So, I would say that, folks have said a lot of what I would have said. So I appreciate that. Wiz, I think you and I have been in a couple of conversations with Gad where, that East Coast aesthetic versus the Bay Area aesthetic was at the heart of it. And, I am, from the East Coast and a little in the Midwest. And so, I was, like many of us, born and bred on that New York sound, and it established the foundation of so much. And for me, it's an aesthetic that I connect with. That type of lyricism is a style that I connect with. That said, I couldn't wait for hip hop to become global. I couldn't wait for it. And as soon as artists started rearing their heads in different cities across the country, I was excited. I didn't mean I liked everything I heard. Stuff that was coming out of LA in the late 80s, I was just like, dope that it's out there, but, and like when things were emerging in the South, I was just like, all right, we're doing it. Like, this is a real thing, but, depending on who it was. But then there are those, shining moments that come out of these regions that are undeniable. And like when an Outcast appears and it transcends regions, like, that's just amazing rap music. Like, it's just amazing rap music. Doesn't matter where it came from. If it came from New York, like, we'd still be like, yep. If it came from, Antarctica, we'd still be like, yep. So yeah, I don't want to like have my perspective be like an outsider to LA critiquing Dom Kennedy. I moved to LA in 2009, and it was right, really when that like 100 shit was cracking. And like when I first got here, everybody was like, get on that hundreds. And I was like, okay. And I got on it, and I thought it was like a really exciting culture, but Dom Kennedy wasn't the guy for me.
He wasn't the guy for you.
He wasn't the guy for so I forget who it was. Somebody mentioned Cool Kids. Like that sound, like I was just like, yeah, that hits right there. Like that.
Chicago.
I mean, yeah, they're from Chicago.
What's that?
They're from Chicago.
No, I know, but like that was the era, and like when I first moved
blog rap.
big here. And I was just like, yeah, man, that's dope. And like, it wasn't really jumping off in New York at that time. But when I got here, it was just like, yo. And so like, for me, that hundreds era, you know, introduced me to a lot of stuff. Like I'd heard Pac Div before I moved out here, and I was instantly sold. So like, there were folks that were a part of that moment in time that did it, and Dom did not. And I checked in with him, since, and he's just not the guy for me. I appreciate that he's representing. What's that?
What's crazy about Dom is that he would rep Lamart Park so hard that to this day, and today was the first time I'd listened to any Dom Kennedy in maybe half a decade. But like every Sunday, when I'm watching Insecure and they're in Lamert Park or something, Dom Kennedy's top of mind. So, like, out of all those rappers at that era,
he's branded that area.
Pretty much the most impactful for me because I'm still, like, I don't even have to be, like, listening to rap music. I'll think of Dom Kennedy because I'm doing some other thing that's, like, watching some other type of media. And he solidified himself so much in a way that, there's so many songs that you love or you hear or don't even love that are just subconsciously in your psyche that you you see something or whatever. Like you might see like a Dizzy Gillespie album, you'll be like, oh, Greg Nice or something like that. Like you'll think rap shit because of just something that just totally is subconscious. So like anytime I watch like something that's LA that has to do with Lamert Park and currently it's Insecure every week. Dom Kennedy pops in my head.
Yeah. And I mean, look, I want to say this. I want to say this.
That's important. I just think that's something that's important in terms of like, as an artist, I think he did something that stuck with me. Even if I don't listen to his music, I still culturally find his relevance.
This is the point I want to make because look, Dom Kennedy makes slap, but like, there's a lot of artists that make slap that we're just not going to consider like the Pantheon MCs or whatever, right? But I wanted to make this case, right, that I'm using this album again because it's, we have a limited amount that we could pick from that's on platform from him, right? Which is another detriment to him, right? Like, my point is that I'm using a Los Angeles MC to make the point about how a lot of rappers that are from this city, they actually don't get to sometimes shine on the level that you would think because you think of Los Angeles as a place that people move to have to do music. But if you live here, like every other rapper moves here and basically steals their shine. Like you might, if you're a rapper and you like, I want to go to the club, and you could go to the club, but Wiz Khalifa bought out the section. Everybody's paying attention to him. If you a local rapper, you know what I'm saying? I mean, I think G Perico is next up for them, but ironically, I'm using this MC and this album to make that argument and prove that point. But what's also hella funny is that being from the Bay Area, I don't think anybody else would ever do that for us. You know what I'm saying? Like,
can I respond to that as from there? So I feel like, it may not be the hardest Dom project, but I think you might actually be apologizing too much. Like as an outsider for me, and it's not, I'm going to speak on like that era, right? So from Pac Div, Toronto, Blue, all that, right? So what's interesting is, as one of the few people who has never lived on the West Coast, right? I never listened to that project before today. I'm deep in Pac Div's catalog, a lot of that era, that blog rap.
Yeah.
Dom was like, oh yeah, this dude always sounds like he's cheesing when he raps. I remember this guy. Like that was just sort of my understanding. He's just, this is my type of party. Like that's all I knew about him.
Yeah.
But when I listened to him today, it's funny you mentioned DJ Screw, right? So I'm DJing the homie's birthday this week, and he's from Houston, like South Ward, right? So I'm doing all the Swisher House, DJ Screw, that whole. And what was interesting for me is like I knew the hits, right? But like I'd never gone deep. Screw had over like hundreds of mixtapes, right? Mm-hmm. So I just started vibing out, and what I really enjoyed about it is like I was being immersed in a culture I had like very little context for, and he was like my tour guide. And I feel like I understand more about the slang and the traditions and just like how they roll in Houston. And I think similar to that, I listened to that like last night and this morning before I got to the Dom, I'm like, yo, I'm having the same experience right now. Where like I have a cousin in Long Beach, and I'm like, yo, I feel like I'm in like Andre's Cadillac right now, and he's schooling me as to like what's what as his like East Coast cousin, right? So for me, it was less about like, no, the lyrics weren't dope. I was joking with a friend the other day. I'm really over to like take your girl rap. It's like a subgenre that needs to die. But like I did feel like someone, like I had a cool cousin who was just driving me around his hood, like showing me how he lives. And like there's an energy to that. And there's like there is artistry in that like is separate from the bars. Cause like he's sort of like an ambassador for the culture.
Well, that's what I
Yeah. And I just want to say, like, I'm not apologizing. I mean, as you might come to know me in these discussions, like, woo, I mean, I'm probably the most annoying, steadfast advocate when it comes to speaking on rap music that is not considered
right
historically, the best, the vanguard, because doesn't have an East Coast sensibility.
Right.
Even though I love that sensibility. I love it, right?
That's what I was saying earlier about emceeing. Like, there's a plethora of skills an MC needs. It's not just lyrical miracle shit.
Yeah,
The voice, like Guru said, it's mostly the voice. It's all these different things. Dom exemplifies that in certain ways. He's not a lyrical miracle, but he's got a lot of the different tools.
The street shows, Dom.
But
that's what a lot of people don't realize too.
So yeah. I mean, this is what I do want to say. I'm not apologizing, right? But what I'm trying to say is that of all the albums he has, this is the one album though where he shows his influence, where he's influenced by other places. He's influenced by the East Coast. He's influenced by, you know what I'm saying? Because what I want the whole conversation to be like, okay, what is this album and what does it mean for him in his lineup of albums? Classic, because to Paul's point, Paul made a good ass point. Like, he would send other albums from other MCs, but he also wouldn't pick this album.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? But I think this album is dope. I love When I Come Around, the moment when that shit came out. The only knock I get is the video was kind of whatever. The video could have been way better. It was too simple. But that song slaps hella hard. New Jeeps slaps hella hard. Like, I love New Jeeps.
I still play When I Come Around. And little known fact, I think that might have been before Mustard was making beats. And he's doing the intro. He's just doing the intro.
He was making beats at the time, but he was resuming his position as a party DJ because Mustard got big during the jerking era. So it was like they asked him to be on the song to kind of repurpose what his role was during jerking, which, I mean, again, this is
party, get it popping.
We're talking about
Is that him on the cuts in the album? Is that him?
That's not him on the cuts. That might be Drew Bird.
Yeah, I think it's Drew Bird.
Yeah, Drew Bird. Because again, this is, I mean, if we could just get technical about the album. One, this album spawned a lot of people's careers, but also the West Side with Love did too, because Cardo was really getting his first looks here. This is where Cardo started getting his first looks before he became, the God's Plan Cardo. You know what I'm saying? Drew Bird's one of his first productions is on this album as well too. Drew Bird, of course, went on to produce dope cuts on the Yellow Album. Everybody knows him for throwing Shaba. You know what I'm saying? And then again, this is what y'all call Steal Your B rap. This is that kind of rap music. I would argue, and this is how I'm not apologizing, Hailing, like that's not a subgenre. That shit is still very prevalent. People just don't, you might not just be slapping that music, but man, I could send you a playlist of the live wire,
it's still there.
Records rap, you know what I'm saying? I mean,
run that.
Yeah, I feel like
we could drop some West Side Gun or some shit. Like,
I mean, Currency. There's a whole lot of cats. Yeah.
Well, yeah, because rap music is rap music.
Everybody likes to rap about getting your girl.
I feel like, but I did want to say something. I do feel like that women were left behind in this album, like in this listening experience.
I want to finish my point though. I want to finish my point. It's not a subgenre, But one thing that we need to be aware of during these conversations is we're going to actually explore albums, right? Where, yes, in hindsight and in foresight and in current sight, we're going to have to break down the you know what I'm saying, the aspects of chauvinism and patriarchy, and you know what I'm saying. I'm down to have all of those conversations. We're going to really have to break down the cognitive dissonance we all had to implore. You know what I'm saying? Listening to a lot of this music, particularly if you're a woman, you know what I'm saying? Like, we absolutely have to do that. And some of us, to be quite honest, at the time some of these albums will have come out in the past, we were not employing cognitive dissonance. We were listening to that shit like it was the regular, you know what I'm saying? We were consuming it like it was just regular ass music. We weren't thinking about it in the ways that we now, as grown humans who are being more thoughtful and considerate, will listen to it.
Yeah. And I also say, and I do want to move on, but also too, if you listen to Victory Lap, listen to Nipsey's last album, you hear a lot of this album in that album, like in terms of the patterns in which he's flowing. At least that's what I noticed, you know. So I don't know if you guys have heard Victory Lap, or if you know, check that out. Definitely hear some similarities there.
I mean, he's on the album.
He's on the
and he's on the album. And that's kind of why I brought up the idea of his, you know, him being rated, because he is on Nipsey's album. You know,
Nipsey came out of that too.
What's that?
Nipsey, like around the time, you know what I mean, like
right around that time. That's when Nipsey started to kind of do his thing. But like when you look at that video on YouTube, it has like, you know, almost 100 million views. So does that mean Dom, you know, did he reach his ceiling? I guess is the question.
I mean, like, look, that's a good question. Like, I just want to say again, like, you know, yeah, you said this album B.
Yes.
Yeah, I just think that like that's his ceiling. That's where he operates at. And it's dope. I think it's dope. I think he's got his swagger. It's not really. It's almost like he's like minding his business. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like,
right.
He just does his thing with his swagger and his. I've been in his studio. You know what I mean? Like I talked to dude. He got a spot on Fairfax, and it's like he's got the illest swagger. He's got the dopest equipment. He's got the clean sneakers on. He got nice art. He's like the dude that shows up to the basketball court with wristbands on and the new Jordans, but he's just not on my team.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was just about to say, what does that mean for the slap? What does that mean for the music? You know what I mean? Like, you could be cool, but do people like your music?
I think it means that he's limited in what he can do, but he's really damn good at what he does do. Like, he's got this very finite box of just chill shit, and that's why I love Dom, because it's just such a dope fucking vibe. But he can't really, like, and he doesn't want to do anything outside of that, I don't think, but I don't think he can. Which, by the way, I respect when somebody knows their limits. Like, if you were like, yo, I'm a spot-up shooter, yo, don't try to dunk. Like, just spot up shoot. And that's what Dom does. And he's made a really solid career. And again, there hasn't been these amazing guys, but it's not lows either, in my opinion.
I'm about to your point. He says that on Platinum Chanel. He said, take a couple shots and I'm done. Be both. Like, he
knows who he is.
He knows who he is. And look, again, if I'm in the barbershop in the town and we start talking about who the best MCs are, I'm going to say Black Thought. Black Thought is my favorite MC, right along with Andre 3000. Love him. But they are going to look at me like, bro, what are you talking about?
Straight up.
You know what I'm saying? And this is what we're having that conversation about Dom Kennedy.
So I think, to my point around like feeling like I'm with my cousin on the West Coast, the word that came on like my mind when I was listening to it a few times, like, oh, this is folk music. Like, this is specific to this time and this context. And I'm not really going to get it because this isn't my milieu. But, like,
damn, imagine 100 years from now, they're like, yo,
top of party in space.
Like, exactly. But for me, being from where I'm from, like Sadat X taught at my high school, right? So when I'm like listening to brand new New Rochelle, New York. So like when I'm listening to One for All, I'm like, oh, this is like home. You know, similar, a lot of music, Rough Riders was popping, Yonkers was down the street. So like for me, I have reference points. So I think it's effective as folk music because like it's specific and like myopic, like by design. It's not supposed to be expansive. It's like a very narrow lens into a specific experience. And it works for that. It doesn't have to be dope music. And when Paul said vibe earlier, like I think vibe it's like when we talk about like whisper R&B, like vibe is like a pejorative word for a lot of like but to me, this is like the best kind of vibe. Like I've never been to a house party on Crenshaw or in Lamert or whatever, but like when I turn the record, I'm like, oh, I could imagine what that feels like. Y'all party differently from how we do, but kind of feel like I was there.
When you come to the West Coast, bro, we're gonna slap some Dom Kennedy. We're gonna go to
Let's go.
Simply Wholesome.
Give me some in and out.
Yeah, we're gonna do the whole.
Get it. Let's get it.
Dope.
Right,
and put on some folk music.
I just want to bring up real quick, like besides the fact that like Dom didn't reach me, I can acknowledge that his influence. I mean, just with the Nipsey album, his influence is kind of still ongoing. You know what I mean? So that makes him important. So I just want to say like it was a valuable sort of like study to do this one with, and get that from that.
Yeah.
This was a valuable like note for me as a music lover.
Agreed.
For sure.
I just want to say
something from this
everyone had
discussion.
great points. Everyone point was to me was on par. You know, like the description was perfect. That's how I feel.
Dope. So I definitely want to move on, and I want to try to wrap at 8:30 because I don't want to keep you guys too long.
You say 8:30, and I'm tripping because it's like 11.
Oh yeah.
West Coast state of mind, bro.
Edible hit hard, Mike, huh?
No, but yeah, so you know, but I definitely want to get to the last album. Oh wait, so I guess the question for Dom would be, is he underrated, which is 1, rated just right 2, or overrated 3? So just type that in the comments. I think he's a 2. I'm gonna say 2.
You can't make a good Deuce joke with that rating.
Hey, wait. You said one is underrated, 2 is probably rated, 3 is overrated.
Yeah. 3, yeah. So
he did very good for himself. For you know, like he did good. He fell up, and you know, and I love him. I'm just saying he fell up a little bit.
I think
with the Nipsey he did. I think. So
before we move on, I just want to say like. The female perspective, it's really hard to get past the misogyny. Like it's definitely difficult. I've spent enough time in the West Coast. Like I'm from the West Coast, but I definitely lean East Coast in my taste.
Mm-hmm.
But I've spent enough time here to know that if this was at a party, I would be, you know what I mean? Like I would definitely rock to it. So that's my take on it.
No, definitely. That's a good perspective too, because I think that also was like what you were saying, that a lot of that music was at a time when the discussions weren't being had as much as they are now. So not to say that the music isn't happening now, because it's more prevalent than ever, it seems like.
No, yeah, I mean,
it's still like that,
right?
It's more out of pocket now. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. Straight up. And I mean, you know, Amanda, you live in the Bay, so you already know what it is. You feel me? Like it's.
I'm not easily offended either, but I will say that for me it was boring. You know, it's just like that level of misogyny is just it's boring.
Yeah.
Man, Platinum Chanel.
Yeah. Okay, so the last album, and you know, also with this discussion, I didn't know if 3 albums was going to be too much. Maybe we could, you know, truncate the discussion for next time. Still do 3, but make it a little tighter. But the last album is Bootsy. And this was Lex's choice. So I don't know if Lex is there, but if you want to speak on that.
He is here. Yeah, I've been in the other room.
Oh,
Pauline and I live together. So yeah, so this one was, it's funny that it even came up because it's, you know, when Pauline started talking about it, when Halo started talking about this, that song was just in my head, or I'm sorry, What's the Telephone Bill was in my head. And that song, I couldn't remember what album it was, and I couldn't really think of a Bootsy album that I listened to. So I was like, let me throw this in there, you know? And it really made me think of like, someone said the term exaggerated characters, you know, like I think it's worth like dissecting him as that, and then, you know, talking about people along the lines of like Shock G, who I just remember seeing live in person, and like he blew me away as a producer, and I was like, wow, I never really gave him that credit. So very similar to with Bootsy, you know, he was always like this character, and I liked his music. But like in 2006, Wax Poetics dropped a P-Funk issue, and it really went extensively into who Bootsy was, and I was like, oh shit, he started so young, and like everything that he contributed really made me respect him on another level, you know. So that's really why I brought him to this discussion. So yeah, I'm really curious about people's thoughts.
And if I could jump in too, so the questions I have for this one is, I know this is an album that you guys probably haven't picked up in a while, or if at all. But one question would be, would you listen to this album again in 2020? So did you like it enough to maybe pick it back up again in 2020? So, and also too, should Bootsy be talked about more in today's discussions?
He definitely should be talked about more, because
yes.
one of the only people. He was in James Brown's band. He was in Funkadelic. He's his own person. He was like culturally out there because he would just show up in movies. He would show up on different songs and shit. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, he's on the Kali Uchi song. He did this really dope song with the Parliament Funkadelic, and like Kendrick and Ice Cube jumped on it, and then Louis Vega did a house remix of it, and they're all good. So
okay,
but yeah. Sorry, Mike. I didn't want to. I just want to add to that.
No, it's dope. That's dope. Yeah, and I think Bootsy. I mean, to me, what's a telephone bill is one of the best arrangements that I could think of. It's such a dope arrangement, and I just think it's a funny song because I don't know if the concept of a telephone bill is even known for kids. Like the concept of you talk so much that you run the telephone bill up. Like, I think that's such a foreign concept for probably kids under the age of 20, you know? So I thought that was kind of funny. And also just the musicianship is, you know, it's just on another level, you know?
It's
so, yeah.
multidimensional. I feel like the vocals on it, like I think it was co-written by Gary Cooper, and it's very like angelic vocals, you know, and I feel like that kind of makes you feel something. And then the pace of the song, you know, is really like deep and slow, so it really kind of puts you into a vibe. And then really thinking about the year, you know, 1977, it was just such a like pivotal year for music. So when I was listening to it, I was really thinking about that stuff.
Yeah, I was gonna say that like Bootsy is like, it is, as Mike was saying, he's like a figure all into itself. And like Lex pointed out, like he started out super young. He's one of those artists that is like really the key to the funk, because he spans James Brown's band, going from James Brown into Funkadelic, right? And then he was also the one when maybe Funkadelic's reign had waned, like he was able to continue himself. And as I said to Haleen when we were talking about this album the other day, like one of my earliest recollections of like him being top of mind for me was Groove Is in the Heart, right?
Yep.
And like, so like that song was the one that was like, oh, this dude is, you know what I'm saying? Like, who is this guy? You know what I mean? Like, who is he? And he was making an impact on me even then. And then as I got to learn even more and more about his impact on funk, his impact on rap, you know, like I can't listen to this album without thinking about NWA.
Yeah, it's funny that Lex started the conversation talking about like what's a telephone bill, because I've always felt that like ballad Bootsy is the most focused, cohesive Bootsy you get, because like the intro to the album is it's just like peak Bootsy in terms of like how weird and like esoteric it is. Like Maceo Parker is like emceeing a concert or something, and then like he starts like the lyrics, part of it are like All of Me, like this Ella Fitzgerald song. He starts singing the New Year's Eve joint, Auld Lang Syne, whatever the New Year's Eve. It's just a really weird experience. But when he's doing like What's a Telephone Bill, or like Munchies for Your Love, or even like I'd Rather on the other album, like it just seems like he really focuses in, and you can really get, especially I think that like from like an instrumental standpoint, like I think what's really great about Bootsy is that spaced out vibe he gives on like the bass, like the way he can like it's just like a thing that he created, like this very spaced out sound, and it just sounds so perfect on ballads. Like it really just gives this like chilled, relaxed energy that I think is really underrated, because we always talk about him like from the Parliament Funkadelic, the funk, the groove, the party, but it's like when they hit the ballads, it's just different. Like I know somebody mentioned smoking, like, you know, in my heavy smoking days, it was mostly a lot of like funk type ballads because it just hits different in that type of like that wavelength.
Yeah, that's heavy. Yeah, I never peeped that. That shit is true.
Yeah. Munchies for Your Love is, for me, on this album, the standout track for like I haven't listened to this album in a very long time. And as I try to think back on it, I'm like, wait, did I ever actually listen to it all the way through? This was really more of a digging thing. Like I was just spot checking, you know? Right. And it's like listening to it this week and then consistently, I mean, I just went and I had to put Munchies for Your Love back on my phone. I was like, nah, this rocks for the rest of it, because this is actually giving me peace throughout this thing that's happening here, you know? And like, you know, Bootsy occupies such a space in terms of like musicianship across the board, you know? I mean, it's pretty easy to say that, you know, the sound of funk really doesn't like exist the way it does without his presence, like at all. You know, I mean, when you look at the roster of people that jump in to work with him on his project, it's literally everyone,
right?
You know, and that's just like, not a lot of artists get that, you know? There are a lot of artists that are big and can, you know, buy anyone to come work with them. But when you hear his records, you know that it's like, oh yeah, that's my guy, man. We going through, we hanging out, we kicking it. It's like, damn, I want to be a fly on the wall for that moment there, you know? I mean, this album came out, I was 4 years old. There's no way, you know, like I couldn't tell what the cultural moment was, because I'm a 4-year-old. I don't even know music, you know? But as I got older and just seeing that cover, my uncles, like every one of them had it in their crib. So I was like, oh, wait, I know this thing when I found it for myself. To be in 2020, you know, all the 47 in a couple of things, I'm like, damn, this shit still, we talk about that classic before, you know, like this is it.
Word.
You know, this is it. You didn't even have to be in this era. You pull it up now, you play, and it's like, oh yeah.
And to speak on what Wiz was talking about and Paul, you know, it's like Groove is in the Heart was my first introduction to him too. And, you know, and to me it was like, oh, he's the guy with the star sunglasses. Like I didn't even know what he was doing in that video, but he was just kind of with the roller skates, and he was just kind of like a, you know, like his outward appearance didn't justify his skill. And I always felt like
kind of like Dennis Rodman.
like Dennis Rodman, you know, or you know, I think Dennis Rodman, or I think musically like Rick James, you know, I think Rick James kind of turned into this like almost like a joke at the end of his career, where when you don't think about how dope he was as a musician, you know, and I'm afraid that Bootsy is also thought of that way too to some people, you know. So, and I think with the ballads, I never thought about how, like you're saying, Paul, how tuned in he is. But I think that's a great point, man.
Yeah, I think my favorite part of like Rick James, but to draw a parallel, Bootsy, is the ballads. Like those funk ballads are crazy, and I feel like being a fan of like West Coast rap definitely primed me for the sound. If I was too young to really listen to it, back in the day, like I feel like I started like Ruby Sugar saying about spot checking, like that's what I was doing too. When I listened to it, I was like, oh, that's this sample and that's this sample, and just listening to like, I mean, just the grooves, like being primed on it. But the slow jams, definitely like it's some shit in there. Like shit was happening like real crazy.
Yeah.
I just want to jump in is that Haleen saying about Bootsy not getting recognized, and I think that's true. And I almost want to like dare say that I think it's like white folks kind of like flattening certain black artists or artists of color into this kind of buffoon or cartoon. Like it happened to Rick James, and it kind of happens to Bootsy, and happens to a lot of artists as well. But
wasn't Bootsy in an actual cartoon?
maybe,
He was like
some Beavis and Butthead shit or something. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, but I think to that point, it's like just because he did it doesn't mean like
caricature.
He signed up. Like he could have been like, well, this is the only way I can really get money is to wear the glasses and the hat and the roller skates and the, you know. But I mean,
But if I can finish, I just want to say, as a West Coast dude, a dude who digs for records and is super into like disco and 80s R&B and things of that era, it's my first Bootsy album, like ever listened to it, and I felt kind of like, damn, I don't really respect this dude enough, because what everyone is saying, he is like legendary, and to be working with him is like, you know, people, like what Rubik was saying, people are going to want to work with him, and not, you know, he doesn't have to waive the money, and, you know, so I should give him more respect. And it's kind of funny if you think about, you can thread all of these 3 albums together. Like Bootsy is the kind of the DNA foundation. I could picture Dom Kennedy driving around to Bootsy, or him growing up in a household where that's played, and then Hayes Coyote totally idolizing, and vice versa, the musicianship that they all share. So it's weird listening to all these 3 albums back to back. They're totally separate. You can still like thread something, and I think that says a lot about, I don't know, a left of center artist and just the group of people in this and all that stuff. So
I want to point out that not only did Bootsy Collins have a cartoon in the 80s, he had a cartoon that was on the air just like last year called Tales from the Tour Bus, right? So I think some black artists actually have a lot more agency around what they want to do entertainment wise than we typically think, because it's just hard to get a TV show made, period. But when they rise to a certain level of notoriety, people want to make television with them. And I think that's what was happening for him, because Mike Judd produced, you know, of Office Space fame, he produced the Tales from the Tour Bus cartoon that he just recently did, you know? I think that's what it, whoever is on Bootsy's team, who manages him, they do a good job of keeping him relevant, or working with artists who are relevant for him to be on a Kali Uchis song, which has a Pete Rock remix. You know what I'm saying?
Which was good, which I didn't ever suspect to happen at all, man. Especially in modern era, not like, you know, so anyways.
2019, if you think about when he started, and we all know there are artists who come and gone hella quick, you know what I mean? So I want to give props to him for him just maintaining quality over that long ass amount of time. You know what I'm saying? Like,
but that's interesting. It's interesting though that he is that visible, and yet people don't fully understand his contributions though, right? Like, it's one thing to be like relevant, like for example, like watching the Last Dance documentary, because somebody mentioned Rodman. It's been amazing watching Twitter during that, and people being like, damn, this Rodman dude was really good. And it's like, but they knew him though. Like, they knew who Dennis Rodman was, but they didn't realize how good he was. And it feels like Bootsy is really, like, I don't know who made that point, but that's a great parallel, because like, yes, Bootsy absolutely has done an amazing job of staying relevant, but for whatever reason, like, his music hasn't had the same like sort of energy from younger audiences. And it's been particularly interesting because, like, I would say the last maybe decade, there's been this like resurgence of like Afrofuturism and like what Janelle Monáe has done, what a few other artists were doing. And it's like, yo, that's all Bootsy. That's all George Clinton. That's all that's everything they were doing was Afrofuturism before we had a name for it.
Right.
All these folks, I don't want to say they're biting it, but it's obviously like they took that aesthetic and put it in modern times. And I was like, oh, this is where George Clinton gets his props. This is where Bootsy does. And it just never happened. Like, they never just gave them their props for it.
Yeah. That's crazy. Yeah.
And look, and to a point that Amanda, I'm sure you could bring up again too. It doesn't always have to be you, but again, we're gonna go back to these old ass albums, and shit was even more, you know what I'm saying, even more wild and oppressive for Black folks, women, people of color. But then the artists that were expressing themselves during the time, we're not gonna always like exactly what their artistic output was either in that viewpoint as well too.
This one is musically exciting enough though that it's not distracting, you know?
Yeah.
Is it contextually, like, how's this lay? I feel like, is this the Young Ratchet? Was this the ratchet shit back then?
Maybe, yeah.
So
Like,
Yeah.
just a full because context we just established is really important. Like, what
Is this considered promiscuous?
shit was ratchet? I think I don't know.
Fast.
Yeah.
fast.
Well, Juicy Fruit was like X-rated when it came out. So there were too many Juicy Fruit. So this is probably.
I mean, because you know, was it 77?
Yeah.
77.
Yeah, I think everything you listened to from 77 was.
I love
This
that
is
question.
characteristic.
I love that question. Lex, what do you think? Is this risque?
Well, I think like where I've been wanting to ask a question is like, when did we first hear Bootsy or funk in general? Because I think that kind of adds to the cartoonish qualities, you know, when things are weird to us or new to us, like totally like foreign, you know, we joke about it and laugh. Because I know I was put on like really young, like I was in first grade, my PE teacher would play them, and it was like everyone would like really get into a mood, you know, and I was just so lucky to be put on so early. But I do remember like kids would laugh, and it's like, oh, put on that Bootsy, like the name was funny, and
I can speak to. Let me say something really quick though, because I will say that growing up in the '80s, any reference to the '70s was like, oh shit, you got an afro, like everyone starts laughing, or oh, you got on bell bottoms, you know, like that was a joke in the late '80s and early '90s, you know, and then so I think it was also that too, like looking at Bootsy with an afro and looking at these, you know, like remember the shit, there was a group called the Afros, like that was like kind of like a clown show, you know, like this.
Yeah, but
you know,
There's a very specific shift.
Well, and I'm curious, like, was Sun Ra really embraced when he was around? Like, you know, are we really gonna feel the impact once Bootsy's gone? Because it's like we have these living figures walking amongst us, and it's great to hear. I didn't know about some of these collaborations that I really want to get into, you know. But it's like I think of jazz greats, and like he is a part of a specific era too, where it's like there's gonna come a time where we're gonna be unfortunately writing that obituary, but it's like, why? What can we do while we have him? And like really, you know, embracing and honoring, I guess the foundation that he's laid for like so many people, you know.
I think just being in a discussion group and like using the power of Spotify or any streaming service, finding the music, and I don't know, just telling people the way we normally communicate, like tweet about it or put in a mix or make an edit, or I mean that's all we can really do. But yeah, I feel you though, 100%. Like, why doesn't an artist have to pass for us to like give a shit? Which is this fucking lame, especially when it's like black art. It has to be kind of what Wiz has been saying. It's got to be, you know, wrapped in misery or sorrow or death for us to care about it. It can't just be celebrated when it's thriving, you know?
And I'm glad going back to what you were asking, I think, you know, was this ratchet? It was like, why not allow like black men to be sexual? And like, you know, that was that era. But I think like just the idea of pleasure and like, you know, speaking that and like pressing it into a record is pretty radical. I think it's pretty amazing.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard. I think we're in such an interrogation mode of so many isms that we've lived through that it's real. We are not yet at the point where we can take. I mean, that was a great question, Lex, and I love that. I'm gonna actually have to steal that, but we are not at the point of where we can actually unpack that in ways that makes I feel like people that have been feel like they were hella marginalized, particularly women in the patriarchal society. Like we're just not at the point yet where we can actually break that shit down. You know what I'm saying? Like I wish that we were, you know what I'm saying? But we not yet, you know what I mean? But the 70s definitely, the year that this came out was exactly in the middle of the fight for equal rights amendment for women. You know what I mean? Like it's 74. You know what I mean? So those discussions are going on and they're being legislated at the same time. You know what I mean? But the way that this album presents is just hella slapping. You know what I'm saying? Like from the jump when you turn it on, it's groovy as fuck. You know what I mean? Like
yeah.
There's a really different shift though. If you're talking about like Marvin Gaye, for example, drops "I Want You" in '76, just the year before. It's a theoretically like erotic sexual album. James Brown was, you know, more euphemism, but like was talking about sexual things. And if you see Bootsy in James's band, he just looks like another dude from the '70s with the afro and, you know, whatever. But the shift of like, it's not just that they're talking about sex explicitly, it's like everything else. Because Marvin Gaye still was dressing like a crooner. James Brown was still dressing like James Brown. They were speaking sexual and then doing this other shit that just didn't make any sense. Like, there's no era you put Bootsy Collins or George Clinton in that they fully make sense with everything else that's going on. Like, it was an introduction to some shit that we don't even fully understand now. So like the sexual thing was through the '70s, but like they introduced this, like, I'm not sure what they're talking about sometimes. I think Sly Stone is very similar to that. And like, I don't know what the fuck Sly's talking about. I know half of it was based around drugs, but like, it's just very out there.
Talked about the drugs yet,
The drugs kind of matter, and like in all of these conversations with these people, the drugs matter.
Come on, man. You gotta talk about the substances, man. Like Bootsy shit, like that spacey sound is so psychedelic and so trippy, and the twang on it. I also feel like personally, I was really excited about this selection because I've always had a fascination with lead artists that are bassists, specifically involved with the bass, right? Ron Carter, Oscar De Leon, Bootsy fucking Collins, yo. And bringing it up sort of in a contemporary sense, I remember when Childish Gambino dropped that joint, and the first thing I thought was like, I'm mixing this shit right into Bootsy, you know, and which obviously became the transition, right? Everybody did that joint, but like, something about, and then, you know, to add to what y'all are saying, it's like the ballads driven by the bass groove, something about that kind of musical perspective coming from the bass makes Bootsy's music in particular very special. I think that combined with his, obviously his personality and the psychedelics, man. Like, yo, listen to Bootsy Collins and then listen to Bootsy Collins on LSD. It totally opens up and you're like, oh, it's like it's all like, what the fuck are they talking about, until it's like, oh shit. You know, it's like listening to Strawberry Fields, like if you're on LSD. You know what I'm saying? Like, I'm only saying this because I like psychedelics. You know, I'm an advocate for the people who want to do it. But now that's like, I'm an advocate. Hey guys, I like to experiment with these controlled substances. I time it. I'm safe. But back then it was like, hey baby, we're all on LSD and we're getting together listening to some albums. Like this shit, it wasn't that much thought into it. So the music, if we were instrumentalists, I know a couple of y'all make music. If we were in the groove right now, we were all in the same room tripping, like that has a special essence to it that Bootsy really, really personified and forever influenced.
So I think, or is someone going to add to that? I think so. That's a good segue into the question. So, are you guys listening to this album in 2020 again? Like, will you guys put this album on again?
Absolutely.
So 1 yes, 2 no.
I put 3 because it makes you want to go listen to other Bootsy, because I know he's got smoke. But
it's crazy.
Yeah. I mean, Munchies for Your Love and Telephone Bill, those are the ones, and I'll leave it at that.
But even what we were talking about earlier about how his reach is, you know, cross-generational, I'm like looking at his latest album, which came out in 2017. It's so diverse in terms of like the different people he has on it. From like, there's 2 songs with Kali Uchis.
Okay.
He's got Big Daddy Kane. He's got Stanley Clark. You know, he's got just all these different people, and it's like, damn, he's still in 2017. I don't even know how old this fool is now. Like, because when he was in James Brown's band, it was like the 60s. You know.
Yeah,
so,
but he was like 19 back then, though, too. So he was he was a teenager. But I think you just nominated your album for your next The next group, man.
No, I didn't.
No, this
Yo, we're gonna end up having a
Down's
whole
on it.
side discussion.
Oh, Drew Down's
Drew
on.
down. Drew
Drew
down.
Down's on it as well.
But
Baby bubble burning rubber.
But a funny, because I heard I've been binge watching or binge listening to Questlove Supreme, and I recently heard the Bootsy Collins episode, and he talks about how that voice was originally a Jimi Hendrix impersonation. I thought that was a really interesting fact.
Wow.
I mean, and it makes a lot of sense. You know?
They came up together.
Yeah.
Yeah, he said his two biggest influences were Jimmy and Sly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he did that impersonation in front of George Clinton, and George Clinton said, "Yo, like do that," you know. So that's how that voice was born. I thought that was pretty crazy.
Your own friends that pigeonhole you for the rest of your
I know, man.
Shoot, gave him, man, like Wiz, you said people of characters, you know what I'm saying? And you just compact it. He's a character. We know, like, oh, that's that dude, you know? And that's marketable because musicians are terrible at marketing themselves. But if you got a thing, you know, at least people who are not sophisticated music-wise can grab onto that thing, and then he can make all the music he wants. But that thing, it's easy. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
Yeah,
I stole Mike's.
Everybody loves. If you got to everybody loves a character.
Yeah, I stole Mike. Mike was about to say that, so I stole Mike's thunder there. So
I waited 2.5 hours. I waited 2.5 hours to say that. I just gotta wait for next week, I guess.
Hey, man.
Well, your internet is so slow. You probably said at the top of the conversation, and it's only now like floating up, like it was buffering the whole time.
You could just say it, and then we'll just act like we just didn't hear it before.
Fair enough. Yeah.
Guys, I got
No, but I wanted to wrap it up at 8:30. So yeah, I definitely appreciate you guys. I want to email you guys individually, or email this group just so you guys can contribute to the next one. Maybe you guys could give some album suggestions. And then the way I do it is I just pick I put it in a spreadsheet, and I do a random number. So I put the numbers, put the names 1 through 20, and then I'll just do a random number on whichever one comes up. That's the album.
And I just want to say real quick, and people are asking questions like, can they suggest more than 3? And people have been suggesting more than 3. Like, there's a second and third pick, for each of the eras. So I would say definitely do that. We're gonna pick, but you got to pick your first 3 so that they'll be considered. But man, this only works if you guys make those suggestions. So.
Okay.
Yeah, so we'll say up to 3. So we're looking for a new one, a old one, or excuse me, new, mature, and vintage. So mature being 1990 to 2015.
Hey, in the doc, can we put the eras next to the words, like how it says new? Can we put like the time, the years?
Yeah.
Window.
So it's easier to
Window of
in
year.
that one doc.
Yeah, so the doc, I'll make it so you guys could type on it. I just made it read only, but I'll make it so y'all could type on it. I just maybe put like 2 or 3, 3 maximum for each column, and then that'll give us a big pot to choose from. So, and then the next one, because I think I'm definitely down to do this again, but I definitely want to try to keep it under 2 hours, or like at 2 hours next time. But this is the first one, so
Just gotta not have any more Dom Kennedy albums.
There won't be, because the good ones aren't on streaming. So yeah.
I think.
To be fair,
hey, that's what I was gonna say. We also spent a lot of time doing the introductions.
Intro. We did like 45 minutes.
Yeah, we wanted to do that, but at the same time, I feel like there's gonna be times where the discussions are gonna go either which way, but we will try to keep it very nice.
Yeah, we'll tighten it up for sure, but yeah, I appreciate you guys. I want you guys to enjoy your evenings.
Thank you.
Yeah. So, I guess. One more thing. I wanted to do like the quotable of the quotable of the session. you know, who said the the best quote. I like what Paul said when he said, "When you're doing a lot, you're probably doing too much." I feel like that could just be applied.
It's nobody steal that because I'm probably going to use it in something I write soon. So don't steal that shit.
Right.
I tweeted, "Culture is not finite" by
that was
Ms. Ward.
Yeah, that was another one too. That was another one. Culture is not finite.
Yeah.
So yes, that's like a good takeaway quote. So
Never get me in trouble on Black Twitter, but go ahead.
Yeah, definitely. So I'll reach out to all you guys, get some feedback from you guys, see how this could go smoother and better for the next one. So
all right, nice meeting you all. Nice seeing you, old face. What's up, Rubik's? Good seeing you. Nice meeting you.
Good to see you.
Yeah, man. Be
Peace,
well.
y'all.
And be safe too, man.
Appreciate y'all putting this together.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you. Thank
Word
you very
up.
much.